Let's dive right into an explainer that is going to completely flip how you think about getting what you want in life. Now, if you're anything like I used to be, you probably look at negotiations as the stressful, adversarial tug-of-war, right? Like the loudest, most aggressive voice automatically wins. Well, scratch that. Today we're unpacking a totally different approach based on a fascinating concept that literally throws the traditional rulebook out the window. And it all kicks off with a pretty wild, counterintuitive idea. What if the fastest way to get a yes is to actually stop chasing it? I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, I used to absolutely hate negotiating. I would just constantly compromise or cave entirely just to avoid the sheer awkwardness of the whole thing. But based on the source material we're looking at today, I was doing it all wrong. It turns out desperately chasing that yes from the get-go might actually be the exact thing holding us back from a successful outcome.
Enter Chris Voss. In the incredible book Never Split the Difference, this former FBI lead international kidnapping negotiator reveals that everything we thought we knew about persuasion is, well, basically backward. Through these intensely high-stakes experiences, literally negotiating for human lives, Voss discovered that people actually reveal a lot more when they feel safe enough to say no. He shows us exactly how empathy, strategically placed silence, and asking the right questions can completely change the dynamic of absolutely any negotiation.
To get why this works, we kind of have to look under the hood at how our brains function during a conflict. See, we usually try to argue logically with someone's System 2 brain, that slow, deliberative, highly logical side of our thinking. But pulling from the work of Nobel Prize-winning psychologists, Voss realized something huge. Terrorists and everyday people alike actually run first and foremost on their emotional System 1, animal mind. So if you don't address those underlying, fast-reacting emotions first, all your brilliant logic is just bouncing right off a brick wall.
And because we usually ignore those emotions and just push so hard for a quick agreement, we fall into a massive trap. Chasing yes right out of the gate actually makes people super defensive. Turns out there are 3 distinct types of yes. What you usually get when you push is a counterfeit yes. Basically, they just agree to make you go away, fully planning to weasel out later. Or maybe you get a confirmation yes, which is just a simple, innocent affirmation with zero promise of action. What we actually want, what we really need, is the commitment yes, a true agreement that leads to real execution. But pushing for it directly usually just gets you a fake.
Voss actually proved this exact point when he took his FBI tactics into the academic world. He showed up at a Harvard Law School executive negotiation course and went head-to-head with some of their top professors in a mock kidnapping scenario. Just picture it. Here's a former street cop facing off against absolute academic heavyweights. Guys armed with cutting-edge theories, logic traps, and even a tape recorder to capture his supposed defeat.
So the Harvard professor, acting as the kidnapper, aggressively demands $1 million or Voss's quote-unquote son would die. Now, instead of panicking or, arguing back with logic, Voss simply deploys this calm, open-ended question. He just looks at him and asks, "How am I supposed to do that?" It's brilliant. It completely flustered the genius professor, right? Because it totally shifted the frame of the conversation. Instead of Voss reacting to a threat, suddenly the professor had to solve Voss's logistical problem.
He beat the academic experts using a core FBI tool called tactical empathy. This is simply the ability to recognize the perspective of a counterpart and actively vocalizing that recognition. Let's be very clear here, though. This is not about agreeing with the other side's values or handing out hugs. Not at all. It is about deeply understanding their situation and labeling their emotions to build trust. You're paying intense attention so you can safely navigate their worldview.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that you need to fundamentally stop fearing the word no. We are socially conditioned to treat no like it's a massive rejection, like it's the absolute end of the line. But in reality, saying no makes the other person feel safe, secure, and in control. It's literally a protective shield for them. When you give them permission to use it, you instantly calm their emotional brain right down.
In fact, Voss writes something incredibly counterintuitive but profoundly true. He says, "No is not failure. It is not the end of the negotiation, but the beginning." Getting someone to say no actually brings down their defensive barriers. It gives them this temporary oasis of control where they can finally relax, drop the defensive act entirely, and genuinely listen to what you have to say.
In the real world, no is rarely a permanent door slamming shut. Most of the time, it just means I'm not yet ready to agree, or I need more information, or maybe you're making me feel uncomfortable. It's merely a pause, a little nudge. It's a fantastic chance for them to articulate what they actually want. And think about it. Once you know what they don't want, you have a much, much clearer path to what they do want.
And there's a highly practical application for this. Let's say you're dealing with someone who's completely ignoring you. Maybe it's a client who went cold, or a colleague who's avoiding making a decision. You can intentionally trigger that protective no by sending a really simple one-sentence email. Have you given up on this project? It is so incredibly effective because it plays perfectly on their natural human aversion to loss. They will almost immediately reply with something like, no, we haven't given up, we've just been bogged down, and boom, just like that, the communication channel is wide open again.
So how do we turn all of this into a real execution strategy? Well, you want to shift the dynamic so the other person actually works to solve your problems. It's basically a three-step dance. First, you trigger the no early on to make them feel safe and in the driver's seat. Second, you use that tactical empathy to label their fears and show you're actively listening. And third, you deploy calibrated questions to maintain their illusion of control while you secretly steer the ship. Let's look a little closer at those questions.
These, right here, are your absolute go-to calibrated questions. Imagine saying these with, genuine curiosity. What about this is important to you? How can I help to make this better for us? What are we trying to accomplish here? By starting questions with how or what, you completely eliminate simple yes or no answers. You implicitly ask them for help, which forces their brain to expend mental energy figuring out a solution for you. They feel powerful and respected, completely unaware of how heavily constrained they actually are by your framing.
But did you notice what word is intentionally missing from that list? Why? Think about the stark difference in tone here. If you harshly ask, why did you do that? It instantly sounds accusatory, right? It triggers defensiveness in literally any language because it feels like an attack. But if you shift that exact same sentiment into a warm, inviting, how can we solve this problem? It suddenly becomes completely collaborative. It grants them control. So rule of thumb, never use why, unless you actively want to make someone defend a position that serves your goals. Otherwise, how and what are your absolute ultimate tools?
Which leads us to a massive realization for any negotiation, whether it's business or personal. Yes is nothing without how. An agreement is completely meaningless without execution. Making your counterpart articulate the how, like literally having them explain the exact steps of how a deal will actually be implemented, does something truly magical. It convinces them that the final solution was actually their own idea. And human nature dictates that people will always fight much harder to implement a solution they believe they came up with themselves.
Now, how do you make absolutely sure that the yes they finally give you isn't just a counterfeit one? You use the rule of 3. The goal here is to get them to agree to the same thing 3 separate times in one single conversation. Now, obviously, you don't just ask the exact same question repeatedly like a robot, you get their initial agreement. Then, you use a label or a summary of their position to get them to say, that's right. And finally, you ask a calibrated how question about implementation. It is incredibly hard for someone to repeatedly fake conviction 3 separate times.
Ultimately, what I really love about this source material is that these emotional intelligence tools aren't just reserved for life or death hostage situations. They actually help you reclaim control in the everyday conversations that dictate your life. Whether you're trying to negotiate a lower car price, asking for a 10% raise at work, or honestly, even just trying to enforce a stubborn toddler's bedtime, human nature remains exactly the same. You're dealing with the exact same emotional system one brain, and these tools work universally.
Which brings us to our final thought. As you head into your next big conversation, whether that's in the boardroom or your living room, ask yourself this: who will you give permission to say no to you today? Who can you empower with the safety and security of a no to finally break through all those polite, counterfeit answers and get to the real, meaningful yes you actually deserve? Think about it, test it out, and watch how it completely transforms your interactions. See you on the next explainer.